Chairman. Obviously, I have a very long history on this issue. I opposed the so-called Recovery Act because it did not have adequate investment. Transportation, about 4% went to transportation as opposed to, can't remember my numbers now, but I think it was 40% that went to tax cuts that didn't put anybody back to work. Tried to get then Chairman Oberstar to vote the committee against the bill, bring it back, and put in real jobs, real construction. Shortly there, he said, don't worry, I've got a promise. The next thing will be a big transportation bill. Well, we proposed a big transportation bill, $500 billion. And the next thing we know, a very chagrined Secretary LaHood was sent down here to tell us the administration was going to actively oppose our bill. And that was because it would require revenues. And the President, the Chairman was proposing a gas tax increase. We kept telling Jim not to say that. He called it user fees, but I proposed alternatives. I said, okay, let's just index the gas tax and bond it. We can borrow money for virtually zero. What a great time to do that and put a few 100,000 or a million people back to work. I proposed a barrel tax later that year, just before he left the White House. Rahm Emanuel told me they were going to support a barrel tax in the lame duck. We lost the House. That was the end of that. So I've had scant support out of this administration on this issue. So I'm well aware of the levels in this bill, which is why I fought hard to get a provision in here that says if future revenues are realized through an action of Congress or an act of God, however it gets there, that they will flow through the bill and be spent under the formulas and policy of this bill. As is, the bill we're proposing today is a 6-year bill with no funding. That is, next year, absent us acting on the floor and putting in additional revenues, the federal government will do $0 of new commitments to transportation projects, absent moving this bill with some funding through the floor. So I'm very sympathetic to what the gentleman's saying, and I believe that the section I have in the bill that says if we can somehow, miraculously, I propose to the President that if he's going to allow the export of oil, there should be a cost, and that cost should go into transportation funding. I just got a score on my barrel tax repealing the gas tax. That's an extra $225 billion over 10 years, exempting all non-transportation uses of the oil. So there are great alternatives out there. Whether we can get one into a giant year-end budget morass like we did the 5 cents for the inland waterway user fees, I don't know. But the capacity is there. I would say the amendment at this point is a bit redundant because the money doesn't exist. In fact, if we don't pass this bill and get some additional money, we're going to see no federal spending, new federal spending next year at all, zero, starting on October 1st. It's critical that we pass this and then work to get more money, and there's nobody, I think, who's offered more alternatives on how to get that money than me. So I appreciate the gentleman's objective in bringing up this point. It's a point I've made repeatedly, he's made repeatedly on the floor and advocating for the GROW Act, and I'm pleased to see that the administration seems to be a bit more supportive now, but not totally there on how we're going to get revenues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. I think obviously you make all the right points. The provision that we do have in that we work together on, as Mr. DeFazio points out, if we're able to get more dollars, it flows through. We won't have to do a complete rewrite on a bill to see those dollars. I'm still hopeful that the Ways and Means Committee, the Finance Committee, working in the Senate, can come up with higher funding levels. I think it's fair to say, and I know there are members on my side of the aisle, some of them in the committee and some of them that aren't in the committee, have offered up different provisions to get more revenues to the Highway Trust Fund. And I believe on both sides of the aisle there is support to find that out. Talking with Chairman Ryan, that's what he's actually actively trying to do with the Senate to get more dollars in. But this bill is funded at the baseline. Increasing those funding levels is just not feasible, as Mr. DeFazio points out. And in fact, if we were to pass this amendment, this bill would face a cut-go provision, point of order, and the bill would die. I think it's important for us to get it out of committee, to get it on the floor, get the funding dollars that we can get, and continue moving this process down the road so that we have a vehicle in place to continue keeping the pressure on finding those dollars. So at this point, I would urge all members to oppose this amendment.